What's up, everybody? Mark with Kardavox Academy here, and we're talking new Fallujah, and we've got Kyle here. Kyle Schaefer, the vocalist of Fallujah. What's up, man? How you doing?
Yo, how's it going? Doing well today.
You've been on the channel before. I ran into you on your first Fallujah tour.
Yeah. I met you very early on in my Fallujah career, if you want to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's been a while. I remember that the last video we did, it was literally coming off the heels of my first tour ever. Like that was I had never gone on a proper tour before I joined Fallujah, and that was my first tour with Fallujah.
Yeah.
So I think when we hung out, like we had we announced that I was in the band like 3 days before I left for that tour or something. So I was very much the new guy at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now it's been, what, 2 or 3 years or something since then?
It's been a little while. I didn't think it had been that long, and then I went back and I looked, and I was like, "Oh, damn! Like it's been a hot minute since we've had you on the channel." And I remember when that song came out. You know, I know for me and for a lot of people, there was like an adjustment period. You know, whenever there's a new vocalist, it's like, who's that? Because you know,
who's this new guy?
your approach vocally to anybody who's watching this. Fallujah's had 2 vocalists that I know of, Alex and then you. And your approach
There's actually a third one in between there as well. There was
what?
There was Antonio was a vocalist for one album in between. So I'm actually number 3.
I'm a fake fan, bro. I'm a fake fan.
Well, so Alex was the longtime vocalist. Like Alex was like the founding vocalist and was on the vast majority of the albums. But there was another vocalist in between him and me. Briefly for one album in there.
Well, but, I'm just on here. I'm not going to cut that out. I'm going to let myself look like a fool. And you know,
Listen, I'm the vocalist now. That's what matters. You know, forget all the old stuff.
That's right.
It doesn't matter what came before. You know, this is when the band really started.
And you know, I think it's interesting to because your approach is very different. And we're going to talk about that here. It's I would say much more dynamic. Then and you know, it's as somebody who has been listening to Fallujah since Cerebral Hybridization, what album was that? Harvest Wombs. Ever since that came out, like and a lot of people don't you know this because we've talked about it, but a lot of people don't know this, but Fallujah was one of the bands that made us be like, yo, we want to make a band now, and thus Kardashev was born.
You told me that. I remember that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
and it's funny that you've been listening to Fallujah longer than I have because I didn't hear the first album when it came out. Like I got into Fallujah like kind of significantly later on. Like for a while, they were a band that a lot of my friends liked because we were from the same area. We were from like the California Bay Area,
right?
And so like, you know, as one of the bigger like local metal bands at the time, you know, I would like hear the name around. And my friends would be like, "Oh, Fallujah is so sick." And it kind of took me a while to like get into them. So
interesting.
You were on the train before I was.
I guess I was. I put a lot of for us when we started Kardashev. It was Fallujah, The Contortionist, and Aegean. Those were the 3 bands we were really listening to like nonstop. Totally. But let's go ahead and let's talk about it because I think that you know, as like you said, as somebody who's been listening to Fallujah for a long time, I think that there definitely are distinct eras, but there's not like a bad era. There's not like an era I dislike. And I think that certainly on the rare chance that Alex were to watch this, hope he understands what I mean. But I think that there is, from a technical perspective and from a vocal analysis perspective, a lot more to talk about new Fallujah than early Fallujah. And again, that's no shit.
I would agree with that. You know, like I mean, as a fan of the old vocalists and stuff too. Like for me, I like doing a lot of different things. I've been doing clean singing longer than I've been doing screaming. And like to me, like my mindset has always been like, I don't think I'm the craziest singer or the craziest screamer or whatever, but I was like, I like to dabble in a lot of different things and have made a lot of different types of music over the years. So I'm like, let's try to just include a wide range in my performances. And to me, I see that as like my strength, you know. Versus like that wasn't really the focus, I don't think, on older Fallujah stuff. Like Alex has this like amazing, huge, powerful growl voice, you know, and it's like you know, usually leans on that sort of power more, you know. But for me, I was like, when I was joining the band, I was like, I'm not going to be a stronger version of Alex. He has this huge, powerful voice. I'm like, rather than trying to just do I don't know, like a worse version of what he does. I was like, let's just spread out and do, try to play to my own strengths. So I think that's happened kind of naturally.
And I think that's the mark of a good vocalist, honestly. But we'll get more into that in a second.
Yeah,
We're already
I digress.
we're 7 minutes in, but you know what? It's my channel and I like the chatting. So let's go ahead. Let's listen to it. You know how this works. We're going to pause a lot. We're going to talk about it. I'll pause it at places that I think is interesting. And I this is a legitimate first time reaction. I have not heard this yet.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. Because this, let me see. This dropped 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
And so this is the second single from our upcoming album.
Oh, yeah. Nice. All right, let's do it. I had a question for you, but I forgot it. So let's just jump in.
Sounds good. It'll come
Louder
back
the
to
Stone, Fallujah. Here we go. Bam. No YouTube cuts. Okay, so that's a really good place to stop. There's a very Fallujah transition for us to like. That's the thing. I haven't heard this song, but I recognize the songwriting technique. So I was like, when you hear the it's like probably a good time to pause.
You're like, something else is going to happen next. Let's take a break.
So your highs sound a little different.
I'm doing a couple things here. Yeah. So I'll let you go on first. But yes, you are correct. I'm doing some. There's one new thing that happened in that section we just listened to that I have never done on releases before this, and it pops up like a few sort of separate parts on the album, like very sparingly. But it's like a kind of weird new voice I was like experimenting with a little bit.
Yeah. And no, you don't have to defer to me. This is all about you. So feel free to tell me about it. Feel free to go, because I was going to point out a couple things, but you run with it. We're here to make you look cool and talk about your voice. Not that you need my help, but whenever you're ready, tell me about it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this is actually like when you hit me up to do this video for this song in particular, I was like, this is a great one because literally the like this section we just listened to, it's like to me, there's like 3 different sort of types of screams I'm doing in this one section, which is more different sort of techniques than I have typically like mixed in before, especially just with like screams alone. Like no cleans yet, but there's still these like multiple sort of things to it. And to me, like, maybe you can weigh in on this, but I can tell you how I think of these 3 different things. Like, so there's it starts with the kind of like medium low growls, which I'm doing like a false chord sort of thing that I've been doing for a while. That's like, to me, I see that as my version of like the sort of regular death metal voice, like the, they're like, Fallujah should have low death growls. I'm like, okay, that's my version of that, the lows. And then my highs, typically, I do a like falsetto based fry scream. And I've been doing this before too. Like it's all over the previous Fallujah album. And it's the kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's a kind of like smooth sort of distortion, like a lot of saturation in it, not a lot of like pitch in the voice, but kind of like, higher typical fry kind of thing, but for my falsetto voice. But then the new one that I'm kind of mixing in to certain songs on this album for the first time is like, it's like a really nasally, shouty kind of pitch, like sort of thing. And that one, I didn't really come from a place of real technique. I was trying to emulate 1 or 2 particular vocalists and came up with this like nasally sort of thing. Came up with it in the sense that like I don't normally do it, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of different. Sounds like other guys that I normally don't sound like. Yeah, there's a couple lines where I'm doing that, and it's like it's clearly with my chest voice. It feels like some kind of fry, and it feels like I'm just kind of compressing as tight as I can and getting really nasally and doing a like kind of pitched yell thing. But that one, it's kind of a new thing. I'm like, all right, well, throw in that weird new voice I'm doing.
Yeah, sure. It sounds really, really nicely controlled. It sounds really nicely balanced. Like there is that pitch underneath, and that's the, I was like, oh, whoa, interesting, because I'd never heard you do that before. If you
Yeah,
said, I think,
I saw you perk up in that moment. I'm like, okay, you noticed the weird new thing.
yeah, exactly. And like one thing I think is interesting and is about your voice so far on this, and we can get more into detail about it later. But it sounds, tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like production wise, your voice is a lot less saturated than I'm used to. Like I feel like normally I'm hearing and again, I'm not in the room when you're recording or mixing, so feel free and I'm not a producer, so you can be like, that's not how it is. So it won't hurt my feelings because I'm often wrong about production. But I feel like I very often with your voice hear like double tracking a lot, and then a delicious amount of reverb. I love my reverb. I love it. And this sounds much more like here are the vocals. There's definitely some EQ, there's definitely some compression, but I don't hear a lot of as much of that drippy reverb that I'm used to. And it's nice because it shows how, what's the word I'm looking for? Efficient and controlled your tone is, especially on that false chord tone. It's not super air dumpy, which a lot of the time false chord is air dumpy.
Totally.
It almost to me, and we wouldn't really know unless we scoped you, it almost to me sounds like you've got a little bit of epiglottal closure, just like maybe a touch. I just recently found out I was doing a lot more of that than I realized. So
yeah, it's possible. I'm familiar with that concept, but I feel like I'm not good at diagnosing. You know what I mean? Like when I teach vocal lessons, like with people on tour or whatever, like it's one of those things where I feel like there's certain gaps in my knowledge where I'm like, I know a pure false chord voice when I hear it. I know a pure fry voice when I hear it. And I know when there's something kind of different, but sometimes I don't know what to call it exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this section, there's a couple things going on. Like, one, so you're right. In terms of the like arrangement and production, it is a little bit more raw, I guess, in the sense that the vast majority of the lines in that part are just one layer, like no double tracking. There's certain parts. I think actually the only part in that section that has multiple layers in it is the very last line has the sort of lows in the front and then some quieter highs panned out to the sides. And when I do the nasally fry kind of pitch yell thing we were talking about a second ago, that one is like panned out. But other than that, it's just one track in the middle, no layers.
Yeah.
Intentionally went for I remember recording this part. I wanted it to be how do I say it? Like put a lot of voice into it and have it feel a little bit more like wild and a little bit less controlled than like a pure like full saturated low tone. Like for certain parts, I've been thinking more these days about instead of being like low and high, being a little bit more in that mid range where I'm basically doing my low technique, but like pushing it a little bit higher in a way that gives me more room to like feel more expressive with my voice.
Yeah.
And just as a stylistic sort of thing. And like for whatever reason on this part, I thought that would make sense. I was like, instead of doing like growls, I want to be more in this like this kind of mid range where I can go up and down more and put more voice into it with like, I mean, like voice as opposed to like the pure distorted saturation,
dude.
And yeah,
it's like we were sharing notes, because that's exactly part of what my mentality was on our recent release. I was I don't want to be super low all the time. I want to bring it up so I can move around. So you're saying, and I'm like, dude, that's exactly what I was thinking. That's nuts.
Yeah, and maybe it's just a phase. Who knows? But that's how I was feeling for some of these songs. And I feel like that helps with enunciation and stuff too. Like if you want to get your lyrics across, you can kind of speak more naturally compared to like when you're being in the if your goal is to be like the low death metal brutal voice all the time, like everything kind of gets filtered through this like sort of shape, and it's some of the enunciation gets a little bit lost. And yeah, I don't know. I think I just wanted like clearer lyrical focus and just to feel a little bit less like I'm trying to lock into established techniques and more like I'm kind of letting my voice just sort of come out. That's what I was thinking about for this part.
Yeah. Well, I like it, and I think the production choice sounds really good against like the very technical, very well techy guitars. Like it sounds like a little bit stripped down, but not empty, not what am I trying to say? It doesn't sound like something's missing. It sounds like certain things have been intentionally taken away so we can hear the technicality that's going on. And that's a smart move, because sometimes you hear very techie metal bands, whether they're like tech death bands or they're like a deathcore band doing techie things, and they still keep all the layers and they still keep all the reverb. And you're like, I'm sure that there's some cool stuff happening in there. I'm sure of it.
Totally. Well,
so
and the particular section we just heard is like that's very much the case. Like this, we haven't gotten to the rest yet, obviously, but one kind of theme we had with this album, with the songs, was like we wanted a lot of contrast and a lot of dynamics and a lot of just changes into pretty much every aspect of the music as it goes.
Yeah.
And there are other parts of the song that are extremely layered and are very like textured and dense and stuff. And kind of contrasting that with like to me, the part we just heard is one of the like, I guess, driest parts on the album, I guess.
Interesting.
Because I am prone to doing a lot of layers and stuff, and it's yeah, we just wanted a lot of changes, and so I'm sure you'll agree. We'll go through the rest, and you'll feel like this section is totally different from this in terms of the aspects you're describing, with like the sort of production choices and all that.
Sure. Well, with that being said, let's keep going. Well, I'll keep an ear out for it. Here we go. I can hear. Oh, there's the big chorus.
That's all right. I like the screenshot you paused on. Look at Kevin there.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. So I can hear a couple things that you're talking about. I can definitely hear this like sort of. I hesitate to say blend, but I can hear, especially now that you've pointed it out, that there is a low technique that has been lifted up a little bit higher, right? Because we still have, and we still have some of those darker frequencies, but we have them. This is going to sound stupid, but hopefully you know what I mean. Some of these darker frequencies being put through a higher vocal tract shape, like a vocal tract shape that you would usually use for a brighter tone, but utilization of like a distortion source that's associated with a darker tone. And it's creating a really interesting like blend. And then I hear what you're saying about, especially that transition where the song kind of like slowed down a little bit. I can hear there are like a lot of slightly voicey onsets. There are some spots where you lifted where a little voice just sort of like peeks in briefly and then goes away.
Like going into the note and stuff like that.
Yeah. It I wouldn't say that it really sounds like him, but the allowance of the voice to do it at once while transitioning always feels very like Johnny Davey, very Job for a Cowboy for me.
Sure,
and I wouldn't say that you necessarily sound like him or the song sounds like Job for a Cowboy, very different bands, but the approach, because Johnny Davey does a lot of like what I call like shaggy vocals. Where like, and people say this.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't heard it called that, but I already know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And sometimes people will be like, because I do these videos on Instagram and TikTok where I like transition slowly into a metal voice, and people will be like, oh, you sounded like Shaggy for a little while, and it's like, absolutely yes. So I can hear a lot of what you're doing in this space, and I hear those other layers as well. So it's interesting to jump into it with this sort of foresight. I have a question for you more on writing, if you're interested.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing I've started doing with many of my students is once they reach a certain point of proficiency, we find an instrumental song for them, and I'll buy it from wherever. And they write their own vocal lines, We work on a song together versus doing a cover. And one thing that they all struggle with is like, what do I do? Like, I know how to make these tones, but
that is the question, isn't it?
That is the question, because like, it's one thing to be able to go, and then another thing to know how to cooperate with song. And many of them will bite off more than they can chew, and I let them, and they'll pick something.
That's how you learn.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can't genuinely know that sort of thing or have a real sense for it from having somebody describe it to you. Like, it can point you in the right direction, but like, I think trying it and learning what works and doesn't work for yourself, and like hearing it back and being like, I should have written this part differently. That's to me, that's how you actually learn it.
Yeah, and they will almost always pick something very techy, like the most like thal like thing they can find. And so I'm curious, when you're, because these obviously for people like you have been doing that for a while, I don't think you would hear this riff and feel intimidated by it, because you've been doing vocals for, God, I think longer than me, actually, if we're counting clean singing. I think you've been at this longer than I have.
Yeah, I started in 2010, probably, something like that. 2010, 2011.
Yeah, I was doing vocals at that time, but I was just being silly. I wasn't taking it very seriously. But I guess my question is, when you hear these very technical, very like lots of syncopation, lots of like polyrhythmic things going on, what is your approach to just finding your way? I know what I do, but I'm interested what you do in hearing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so to me, the first step is just it's not a rocket science, but just listening to it a lot and really, really drilling into your head, like not just like kind of knowing how the riff goes, but like really know how the riff goes. Because to me, what's important is like understanding where the accents are in like a very detailed and precise kind of way. Because like, to me, I think about like, I guess there's two considerations. Like, if we're talking about screaming vocals, you're mostly just trying to figure out like the phrasing, right? Like the rhythmic patterns and that. And I'm usually thinking about that kind of separately from lyrics at first. Like, I know some people may try to like write a lyric and then fit that over the line, squeeze it in a certain way, which like sometimes that works, but more often than not, that's not gonna be what you are doing. Like, you kind of have to me, I find I have to build the framework for like, okay, the line's gonna go like this many syllables, more or less. Maybe there's a little room to tweak it if I have a sentence that almost fits or whatever. But just listen to it a ton and like imagine without worrying about words specifically or lyrics, I'm just like thinking about what sort of parts could go over it first, in the sense of like, okay, where should there be a line and where does the music need to breathe a little bit? That's like the first question. It's like, which sections even need vocals? And then for the ones that do, like, I think about, should it be a lot of lines crammed in? Should it be a couple lines more spaced out? Do I like the feeling of starting right on the downbeat, or do I like to hear a little bit of the riff and then come in? And there's no like right or wrong answer, but I think just asking yourself those questions like consciously, like, would I like it if the line was like this or like this? That kind of helps you get more to the place of like what is going to be your favorite version of like a vocal line over that. And I think once you kind of have a general sense, like, okay, I'm going to do a line that's like kind of, about this long over this part of the riff or whatever. I just think about like the thing I like to, or I try to avoid, is accenting like the wrong beats or the wrong like spaces between the beats. Like, especially like you said, if the riff is very rhythmic and like polyrhythmic and there's like da 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 or whatever type of stuff, like you don't have to hit all those accents. But I think about fitting into that framework and not fighting that framework, in the sense of like, if the riff is da 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 da, I don't want to be like da 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 da. I don't know, something that is like similar but not quite. Like, it has to be very locked in and catered, in the sense that like I will often have like a natural idea for a vocal phrase. I'm like, the line could go like this, the rhythm will be like this, and I'll hear it over the music, and I'm like, you know what, this would lock in a little bit more if I shift that one word a 16th note forward or back to like land on the syncopated accent. And I do that a lot, and you end up with phrases that like you may not have just thought of that rhythm in your head. Like, if you have a line of lyrics and you're like, this is how it naturally flows, like you may not have these little nuanced syncopations in it, but when you're pairing it with the music and looking at it really closely, you can shift things and like this lock in to make these more interesting patterns too. And like, to me, a great example of that is Meshuggah. Like, you look at Meshuggah's lyrical patterns, or like the rhythms of them, and the vocal rhythms are crazy. Like, it's so syncopated and so catered to the music that it's like you wouldn't see those same vocal patterns over other riffs most of the time. It's like
Sure.
very conscious of like where the accents are. And yeah, I think about fitting into that, but at the same time, not trying to like sing the whole riff, if that makes sense. Like you don't have to hit every accent. It's
Yeah.
like just make the riff is giving you a framework and make sure you fit into that and you're not fighting it and you're not
Hmm.
just doing your own thing without paying attention to the riff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is very important to hear you say. And I'm glad to hear you say it, because one thing that a lot of my students struggle with, and part of the reason they get this analysis paralysis, is they think that when they hit record, what they do on the first time should be representative of the final product. And what I always tell them is I've never met a professional musician who has that expectation of themselves. You know,
right.
You're talking
Once in a while you get very lucky, but that's not the norm.
It's not the norm. I can absolutely relate to what you're saying. Like when we were writing our most recent album, and really anything, I'm sitting here and it's usually like way too late at night and it's like dark and I've got Reaper open and it's like burning my eyeballs and I've got a section looped and I'm just listening to it and it's like
Totally. Gotta loop it.
and I'm just like, my brain is like leaking out of my ear. But in doing that, and then you record something, and then just like you said, you're like, an eighth note would actually be, or the cymbals are going, and so maybe I should go, and in that empty space, do I want to put something? Do I leave it open? And so I am hoping that my students who have that expectation of themselves will watch this and see a professional full-time musician say, I don't even expect that of myself, because that's crazy.
What you were just saying with like asking yourself those questions, you're like, do I want to put something in that space there? Like that's the fun part where there's no right or wrong. You're deciding your own style. And to me, like, it's not about worrying like, is this supposed to have something in the space? It's more just like be intentional with your writing, and like you just don't want to be a type of vocalist that doesn't even cross your mind to like whether you would do that or not. If you're having that thought, like, should I do this? Like, you're doing the right thing. You're writing in a very intentional and like detailed way. And I think that's the key. Just even asking yourself that question in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you this and then we'll get back to the song. There have been times where either through direct conversation or like an interview that I'm reading or watching online, there will be somebody who's like, yeah, like it was crazy. Like I just, all these songs, I just sit at the mic and I do them in one go. And I just first run everything. And they're like really proud of that. And in my mind, I'm like, sure sounds like it. I'm like, like it sounds like you did. It sounds like this was your initial idea. You know what I mean?
We wrote this album in a week. Like, yeah, I could tell.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, those people tend. Well, I don't want to say it. I'm trying to think of how to say this. I've never. How do I say this without sounding like an ass? I've never met somebody on a very high caliber that does that. Most of the people that I've met who create really successful music and like build careers out of it are doing what you're talking about, like really getting into it and having fun with it as well.
I feel like it's a kind of a mark of the genre we're working within too, because like in tech death, like you have to be detailed and it has to take a long time and there's no shortcut to that, but like then you can hear like, Paul McCartney sits down and writes a beautiful, amazing Beatles song and, in an afternoon, like that makes more sense because it's just a different, it's a different game, like when you're working within like 1,000, drum hits per second and all these crazy things going on, then there's no way around having to like really get into the weeds with all of it.
That is actually a really important distinction because you're right. Like right now we are talking about highly technical metal. We're not talking about, singer-songwriter, folk, just a voice and a guitar. And it makes sense, and it's not a jab to that genre because I listen to a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, totally. It's just a different game. It's a different task. Like, writing this song versus that song.
Yeah, I can't imagine being in a band like Archspire, being like Dean or Ollie, and like having to write that. Like my brain would melt. But let's go ahead and keep going.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. That's a good spot. So
Yeah.
I have 3 things I want to talk about, and I don't know if we'll have time for all of them, but I want to talk about cleans
Okay.
because we are both in bands where there's a lot of there's a good amount of clean singing.
Totally.
You know? And it's kind of funny. I still get it, which it is what it is. I still get, I would say, a very large amount of students who they've never even heard of Kardashev before. And
Really?
yeah. And they'll be like, wait, you do clean singing too? And I'll be like, yeah. And they'll be like, why? And I'll be like, I ask myself that question sometimes too. I'll be like, because for me, like, I view myself, and you may be the inverse of this actually with your background, but I view myself as a extreme vocalist, like a harsh metal vocalist who has brought singing into the fray because the music needed it.
You learned singing later? Like, did you start out screaming?
It was mostly, yeah. Like I sang in choir and stuff, and I had like a lightly decent voice because I just grew up in kind of like a musical family, but I never like took it seriously. So when I first started doing like vocal craft, it was harsh vocals. And one thing that is interesting to you, or is interesting for me to listen to your voice, is you're somebody who started out singing, right? Mm-hmm. And so you and I both sing in very similar spaces, like that. A lot of people, this is a slippery term, but what a lot of people would call like those higher notes being like your mix, or even like going up into your head voice sometimes. Sure. And that is a space that has, become easy for me, but in like a turbulent way. And that's where a lot of people want to sing. So this is kind of broad. I'm trying to think of how to narrow it, so I'm not just throwing you this overly vague question, but what's your approach to getting to those spaces where you're starting to approach your break? You need your voice to stay connected. You don't want to flip to falsetto. You want to keep that weight and that connection in your voice without it sounding dark and anchored, because that's something that everybody wants to do, but is very difficult for a lot of people.
Totally. Yeah. First of all, I wish I was better at explaining my clean singing. Like, I feel like when I teach vocal lessons, I pretty much exclusively teach screaming lessons, because even though I've been singing longer, like I don't know how to explain things as well. I'm like, you kind of just do it,
Yeah.
But for me, that range that you're describing is my most comfortable range singing. Something about singing on the higher end of my chest voice, to where I'm like, not so high that my voice is cracking and I'm like straining to hit the notes, but in my like mid-high comfortable zone. To me, I feel like that's the best I can sing. Something about that range, I find it easier to like hold consistent power and hold a steadier pitch, as opposed to like singing low or breathy or whatever. Like those are all like harder ways for me to sing. But doing this kind of like, borderline belting mid to high range thing, I find the most comfortable. And I don't know why that is exactly. I do know that as I squeeze into the higher end of that, I end up compressing more. Like it almost sounds louder, but I'm getting less loud at times. Like I've what you're describing, where you're like trying to go up high, but without going all the way into falsetto, and you're still keeping the full sort of body of your chest voice.
Yeah.
Without being the expert on what's actually happening in here, I'm definitely compressing more, and my voice actually gets like quieter and grittier at the same time as I like approach that range. And I kind of just know how far I can push that before it collapses, up there.
Sure.
So I've kind of gotten used to that. I wish I knew how to explain it better, but yeah, compression is for sure a massive, massive part of that. Like I know that if I'm just doing wide open voice and trying to go as high as I can, that's how you get into this like really unstable, inconsistent sort of thing. But it involves a lot of compression for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of these spaces. Now, I don't have perfect pitch. I could be totally wrong. But if I was to like roughly place where I hear you singing a lot, it'd be like, probably from like D to A, D3 up to like A4 is like the space it sounds like you're occupying. And that's a spot for a lot of new singers that can be, well, especially like moving up to like A. G sharp is when things start to get like really tricky for a lot of people. Sure. Even, well, dudes like us, even like, sometimes like your F sharp, your E, right? But it's interesting because this is exactly what I anticipated. Our approaches are really different. Super different. But the thing about it is
about vocals, right? Like everybody's different.
Yeah.
I always tell people that when I'm teaching vocals, I'm like, listen to my advice, listen to everybody's advice, take everybody's advice with a little grain of salt because everybody's different, and like find what works for you, you know? Like you have to try things and see what works specifically for you because everybody's different.
Entirely. And I think a lot of it is also, you know, I'm with singing, I don't have like any like I saw a vocal coach prior to releasing Liminal Right because I was like, I got to belt some high notes, and I know I could write out how to do it on like a paragraph, but like do it. And it was very helpful. But, you know, for me with learning how to sing for Kardashev, my main goal, and maybe I don't know if this is good or bad, but my main goal wasn't to achieve a certain sound. I was just like, I just got to hit that note somehow. And so
absolutely. Sometimes it's just a means to an end. You're like, I have to perform this note. Let's see how I can do it. And for me, sometimes that's falsetto. Like there are parts where this song I can hit all the notes regularly, but like the previous single we released, for example, there's some notes I hit on the record with my chest voice that I was like, that's not going to happen live. I'll sing the part, but I'm switching to falsetto for the high notes, you know?
Dude.
You gotta do what you gotta do.
Well, I did that. You know, I had to rewrite or reapproach some sections when we played in Germany in October. Absolutely. And you know the thing about it, people get nobody cared. Nobody was like, hey, no, wait a minute.
No. You're up there singing the part. You're not just like leaving it to the backing track or whatever. Like, I mean, same thing with like guitar. Like, you know, I've talked to Scott and Sam, our guitarists in the band, and there's like certain parts where they're like, yeah, maybe on the album I played it like, you know, like picking everything or doing like a certain type of pull off or whatever for like the sake of the particular articulation of the tone. But they're like, live, I tap it because I can do it more consistently or whatever. You know, you just change up your technique to get all the notes out in a consistent manner. And sometimes doing it in a way that you will actually be able to pull off and repeat is more important than being the stickler for these little details and no one will notice or care. Like you're up there doing the thing, you know, they're not like, well, I think he switched to falsetto one note later on the album. So
nobody
opposed to holding that chest voice one note higher.
Yeah, nobody follows it that much. And, you know, most of the people that I speak to, part of the reason they like going to live shows is to hear those little variations, to hear like, and then, you know, like for me, one of my favorite bands is Cattle Decapitation. And he like Travis will straight up do a section entirely different sometimes. He's talked about it in interviews and it's awesome. Like I've caught them live like 3 or 4 times. And when he does that, I'm always like, oh, that sound, maybe I wish they did it that way on the album, you know? But
you know what? We toured with Cattle Decapitation a little while before we started writing this album.
Oh, really?
For sure it had an impact on some of the stuff. Like I don't think it's that obvious of an influence to me. Like I don't think I sound like Travis or try to like work in the same space that he does really. But there's definitely a lot of subtle things where we were thinking about Cattle Decapitation. Like in terms of the whole song, like there's a breakdown part we listened to that we wrote it one way, and then we're like, you know what? If Cattle wrote this, they would have like a big tempo shift like going into it. So we dropped it like 10 or 20 BPM, whatever. Like we're like, that now it's more like Cattle style, whatever.
Yeah.
Totally big influence on us.
Yeah. And
very I know inspiring just watching Travis do his thing too.
Wild. Wild. It was crazy picking his brain in Utah back in March. But let's keep going. We could talk about clean vocals a lot, but let's keep going. Oh no, I'll save it for later. I remember the third thing, but I'll save it. Let's listen to more song and then I'll save it. Here we go.
Sounds good.
Rogue Cheney Crabb enters the chat.
Yeah. I was gonna say real quick. I know this video is not about the music video portion of this, but I just have to give the 2-second spiel on it for anybody that is new to Fallujah or hasn't.
Please do.
Or,
yeah.
This is an interesting video. It's a weird one. It's so this video is directed and edited by our guitarist Sam. Basically, our label gave us because this is the second single from the album. Our label gave us budget for one music video, so we did a like normal, cool metal video with all these effects and stuff. And then we were like, we want to do another music video though too. And Sam was like, even though we don't have any budget, he's like, I want to make a music video for us in house on basically no budget. And he thought it would be hilarious to do essentially his version of like a rap video. And like we're like throwing fake cash around and standing by these like fancy cars that we got a really good deal on to like hang out by, you know? It's our version of like a rap video, and in context I find it very funny because the lyrics of the song are super like introspective and involve this idea of like ego death and letting go of your past life, and here the video is like the most materialistic like rap video. Just we had fun with this one. That's all.
I think what I've been wondering is, are any of these tattoos real? Obviously, this one's not. But
they're actually all real except for my face tattoo. We the other guys really did get tattoos. I think
hell yeah.
I think it was more of an excuse for them to get tattoos. Like Sam was like, yeah, we're gonna film part in a tattoo shop, and like I'm gonna get a tattoo on my leg, and like that tattoo is in the video for like 2 seconds. I'm like, Sam, you can just get a tattoo if you want. Like, you don't have to make it part of the music video. you know, like he's like, we're gonna have a party with our friends. I'm like, Sam, we can just have a party if we want. Like, it doesn't have to be for a music video, you know?
Well,
yes, the tattoos are normal. We had a ton of fun making this one.
Yeah, it looks really it looks like a very nice budget video. Like, it looks well put together. Then
Sam did a great job.
Like many rap videos, the like another like musician, another rap artist, another producer will pop into the rap video. Like, we had like Cheney, who's like she's become a big influence of me. She was a huge influence on one of the songs. There's a spot where literally like
awesome. Actually, I heard the album and I already know which part you're talking about. I'm almost positive. It's like it's highs, right?
Yeah,
it's like you're like that type of thing.
That's the spot. There was not a single word. I was literally in the studio and I was like trying to hit it, and I wasn't hitting it exactly as I liked. And Nico was like, "This is just a true story." He's like, "What are you trying to do?" And I was like, "I'm trying to summon my inner Cheney Crabb is what I'm doing."
That's awesome. It didn't cross my mind when I heard that part, but hearing you say that now, I'm like, I know exactly which section you're talking about.
That's the one. You nailed it, dude. So there are a couple things I want to talk about. I think the main question I have for you, let's talk about fry vocals, because on this channel, because I'm like, I don't do a lot of like pure fry vocals in my own music at all. I do a lot of like false chord stuff, arytenoidal epiglottal stuff, high vocal stuff that like, I call it false chord, but it doesn't feel or look like false chord at all. But like
kind of blend the two, right? There's like sort of mixing that happens.
A lot of that. And having talked to so many vocalists who do have it in their repertoire, and having been in Utah talking with like vocal scientists about it, there are some things about fry that are true. Number one, it's a very slippery term that a lot of people use in a lot of different ways. And the second of the three things that I've found to be true is everybody I know who to my ear has a very fry tone and is doing what they and I would call fry vocals approaches it kind of differently. And then three, I don't know. I'm not going to say that there's nobody, but I've never met in my professional career somebody who really does just go, and then just press on it real hard. I've never met anybody where that's the thing. There's always a transition point. If they do rev up into it like that, you know, they do the and they lean into it. There's always a transition point. So I'm interested, like, basically, what's your relationship with your fry tone? Because everybody seems to do it and feel it so differently. Unlike false chord, where everybody can agree on what false chord is, it seems. You know what I mean?
I tell people this all the time. Exact same thing. It's like fry confuses a lot of people. And it took me a while to realize this, but I'm like, half of the reason that everybody's so confused about fry is that people are literally not talking about the same thing when they're like if you watch false chord tutorials, like people agree, like you said it yourself, like people agree on what false chord is. Like it's, there's, you can do your own version of it, whatever, but it's like false chord is false chord. And everybody's like, yes, that is what false chord means. It's mostly this one particular sort of technique. When people say fry is basically everything that's not false chord. It's like anything that uses
Yeah.
your vocal cords rather than your false chords, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
because there's so many different ways to incorporate that vocal chord distortion, the vocal fry, into your tone, like with any type of voice under it. It's like you can have a really raspy, like whispery, like sort of controlled quiet scream. People call it
Mm-hmm.
fry. You can be belting at the top of your voice, and people call that fry as well, and like everything
Mm-hmm.
in between. And there's so many different. It's such a huge umbrella term, and some people don't realize that. And so like you'll watch two different tutorials by two great vocalists telling you how to do fry vocals, and it sounds like one of them is lying because it's like they're telling you completely different things. And it's
Yeah.
like once you realize that it's a very broad term that encompasses a lot of techniques, everything makes a lot more sense.
Exactly.
And yeah, so the way I do fry is like so I started off doing false chord. Like when I started learning screaming, I didn't know it was called that yet. I was just trying to scream, on my own
Yeah.
record.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, figured out like a very undeveloped like false chord sort of technique when I was starting out. But then I deliberately learned fry later on once I figured out, understood what I was doing. Okay, people call this false chord. I want to do highs too with this other type of voice, so I wanted to learn fry. And when I did that, the one that naturally clicked with me when I eventually figured it out is the like falsetto voice based fry scream. Like so
Mm-hmm.
you can do fry screams with your chest voice, with your falsetto voice, with your mixed voice. And the falsetto is just what I ended up figuring out. That's just what clicked with me. Um, but I teach people that same way because it's I find it very convenient that my fry range naturally sits in a higher sort of zone than my false chord range. So it just lets
Mm-hmm.
me give more separation between the lows and highs. Um, but yeah, so it's a falsetto based scream. It's not quite as loud as my false chords, but I do like to push it louder than it has to be, I think. Because
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you would agree with this, that it's like false chord almost has like a certain threshold to get like proper activation for it in terms of like your push or your airflow versus or I find that at least. And then for fry,
Mm-hmm.
like you can do fries a lot quieter. But for me, like I like to push them into this kind of medium loud sort of range.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, at this point, like the fact that my false chords use my chest voice and my fry uses my falsetto voice, uh, that helps me separate and switch between them because rather than thinking about switching from like now I'm going to turn on false chord, now I'm going to turn on fry,
Yeah.
it's like it kind of feels like I'm just switching to falsetto and naturally a fry scream comes out because that's how I know how to scream with my falsetto.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. One thing I have found that tends to be more global because the way that I teach fry screams now is a student will say, I want to learn fry screams. And I pull up Spotify and I share my screen and I'm like, show me some fry screamers that you like.
Yeah.
And almost all the time, two students are going to show me completely different bands doing completely different sounds. And then
Hmm.
rather than getting into the weeds of, okay, well, that is fry or that's not fry, I say, okay, cool, let's work towards that.
Yeah.
And one thing I've noticed
Like
that
make sure you're
does
talking about the same thing, right? Like,
exactly like make sure we're on the same page together. And one thing that I have found does tend to be global in as far as in as much as the perception of fry screams is that people tend to refer to fry screams as something. And again, this is me describing how people seem to be talking about it.
yeah.
There are always going to be exceptions. There are always going to be things, but people they're tending to talk about vocals that do not generally sit in the chest voice. Whether or not they can is nothing, but usually it's built on a falsetto or on a mix or at least a vocal tract shape that is facilitative to falsetto
Sure.
and mix. They tend to also be talking about a vocal that does not sound chunky. It sounds
Mhm.
more crispy TV static. It may have some chunk in
Totally.
there, but it sounds more
Hissy, smooth. Yeah.
yes. And they tend to also be talking about a vocal that is more air efficient.
Yes.
And
100%.
I have had some people where I teach them how to achieve those sounds and we actually use false chord and we just do like we like blend the false chord and our head voice together, and that makes us fall into a space. And the student will say, is that Fry? And I'm like, well, if you were to ask 100 people, a large portion of them would say yes. And if some of them would say, some of them would say no. But let me ask you this, is it a cool sound that's achieving what you want, sounding the way that you want, and it's comfortable and healthy for your voice? And if they say yes to all those, I'm like, who cares what it's called?
I love that. Yeah,
sound great.
That's what I've talked to so many people that like have a scream down, and because somebody told them that you have to scream a certain way and it doesn't line up with how they scream, they think that they're doing it wrong or that they need to learn something different. Like from a place of like, oh, I'm not doing this correctly yet. And to me, it's like, I always tell people, if it sounds good and it feels good enough, like it feels like you could do it sustainably, it is correct. That is the definition of screaming correctly. Like there's no, other than just wanting to expand your, technique tool belt or whatever, like, which is cool, of course, like it's cool to do multiple different screams, like other than wanting to expand for the sake of that, like you are already doing it correctly and you are like ready to go if your voice sounds good to you and it doesn't hurt you to do it.
Yeah, this is I really like, everybody likes when somebody agrees with them, but I really I really like that you're saying this, because I have to be honest, in the past 6 months to a year, I've actually very heavily changed my teaching method. I still will start off there. Like there are still a lot of like the basic introductory vocal techniques. Like we'll still do like the, the or we still might do the lemon grabby, like, unacceptable. Like we still might do stuff like that.
The Marge Simpson method. That's how I teach that one.
The Marge Simpson method. And interestingly, there are some people where that works wonders, and there are some people where that's never going to work. And you have to know when to switch. But for me, it's become much more exploratory, because one thing I have kind of tell me if you agree. One thing that I have kind of like begrudged, I guess, is that I don't miss how much we were all fucking up our voices back in like 2010, like 2008 through like 2014. I don't miss how much we were all fucking up our voices, but I do miss how different everybody sounded. Like it was a slugfest back then. Like we didn't. There were people who did, but we didn't know what. Nobody was saying false chord and Fry. They were like, oh, Jim from Aegean sounds crazy, or like, how the hell does Trevor get those weird piercing highs, or like, you know what I'm saying? And so I think that and this is gonna sound rich coming from somebody who my whole career is being an educator in this space. I think as we have grid lined it, we have lost some diversity of tone. And I'm not gonna lie, like a little over a year ago, I was getting really disenchanted with my job. It was like, I would wake up and I would have vocal lessons stacked, and I just felt like, oh God, like I can't make myself do it. It was a struggle, because, and I realized it's because I was churning out these cookie cutter vocalists who, this is this, this is this. And so now like, there's still some of that, but I'm much more like, let's only use terms as much as we have to, but let's explore, let's use comfort, let's use control, let's use experience. And I have this one student, he created a scream that at first we both were like, that sounds not great, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
Let's just follow it. And 2 or 3 months later, it's like this really cool tone where both he and I are like, what is that? We don't know, but holy crap, it sounds amazing.
And I think it's okay to say that. Like I've realized that too, that I used to feel like 'cause people ask these questions, right? They're like, I want to sound like this guy. What's he doing? And you try to answer like, well, I'm pretty sure it's some kind of false chord thing, but it's a little bit different, whatever. It's, at first I felt like there were maybe gaps in my knowledge in terms of like identifying that type of stuff. But eventually I was like, you know what? It's like, you don't have to label everything that precisely. It's like a hard thing to balance. Like, 'cause like what you're describing, being like sort of disenchanted with some of the things. I feel like it's because you're trying to balance teaching a technical skill that is also going to be used for expression and creativity. And sometimes those things are like at odds. Like any other skill, like if you're teaching, engineering or something like that, it's like this is the correct way to do this. This is like the efficient way to complete this task or do this thing the right way. And like that's helpful for learning a technique like screaming. It's like you have to give some sort of guidance.
Framework.
Like the
Yeah.
other end of the spectrum is like you just feel it, you just figure it out. It's like no, you need some like structure and like how you're going to understand these techniques. But at the same time, it's like the ultimate goal is to use that skill in like a creative, expressive, like emotional sort of context, right? Like recording music. So it's yeah, I feel like it's a hard thing to balance for sure. I could see how that would be a struggle when you're going through a lot of students.
Yeah. Thankfully I've almost eliminated that issue because like I realized, and this is kind of building on what you're saying. Like, I think what a lot of not just like the metal vocal community, metal vocalists, and to some degree the coaching community, what we find ourselves doing is pointing at a cake and trying to say, is that eggs or flour? And the real answer is it's much more complicated and interesting than that, actually.
Totally.
You have to start with those things separately, but they combine and they create something new and beautiful and fun.
Totally.
Last question I have for you. I know what's your time looking like? Because we're at
I got
almost
plenty of time.
Okay.
I'm chilling.
Last thing I want to ask you about, because this is something that is increasingly becoming popular, at least again, like my view of the metal vocal world is mathematically very small. Personal experience is a poor sample size, but I do notice trends of what people are wanting to learn. Like back when I first started coaching, everybody wanted the whistle fry. Then after a while, everybody wanted like low, nasty gutturals and tunnel throats. Then everybody wanted hardcore vocals. Now what a lot of people are asking for advice on, and this is something I do a lot and you do a lot, and I have my own way of doing it, but switching. And there are some spots where like in here, now I don't know how you recorded it, but this is something you do, switching from a harsh vocal into a clean line.
Yes. Yeah.
That it's like, I can say from experience, it's hard. It's doable, but it is tricky. It is something you have to work on. So talk to me about your approach. Are you strategic, or do you just write whatever works and you're like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to go from this really low tone to a B flat, whatever, like how do you go about it?
Yeah, I love that we're talking about this because it's one of my favorite things to do within vocals. And on this album in particular, I tried to write in a way that would like challenge myself live to do those things because like it's something I've started doing more and more on stage where like, on the last album we did, I would record parts where it's like, there's a scream line and there's like a singing line. They were tracked separately or whatever.
Sure.
But doing it live, I'm like, I want to do both. So I'll just get in the habit of doing it and just kind of naturally got much better at doing that to where I was like, oh, now I can kind of switch back and forth on a dime. And I like doing that live. I was like, let's do that on the album and write a bunch of parts that force me to do that switch, like back and forth multiple times in the same breath sometimes.
Sure.
And it's to me, there's not like a real secret to doing it. I think the first step is getting used to like, okay, I'm gonna growl for a minute and then I'm gonna sing for a minute. And like somewhere in there, your voice is like going from growl mode into singing mode. You got plenty of time to transition, but like you get used to doing that closer and closer. You're like la la la, like back and forth. And even though you're not smashing those lines right up on each other, your voice is shifting gears in between, and you just get to do that with less and less time to where you kind of figure out how to shift. And one thing I've found is that it's I can switch better from certain types of screams into certain types of sung notes. And I think it's because I do chest voice for my false chords and falsetto for my fries. I can very easily go from a fry scream to a falsetto note.
Sure.
And I can easily go from a false chord growl to a chest voice regular sung note. But it's hard for me to do those because then you're switching two things at once. You're like switching from screaming to singing, and you're switching to a different area of your voice.
Register, basically.
Yeah. And so that's part of it too. Like sometimes I'm like, why is this one really hard? I'm like, oh, I'm trying to force myself to like go straight from a growl to a falsetto or whatever. But with the fries, I'm already doing falsetto. I'm like, I can just turn the distortion on and off. It's like much easier. So sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do, some things are just harder also, depending on what you're forcing your voice to do.
Yeah.
I find there's really not a secret. You just do it separately to make sure you can do both in then put them closer together. And then you just learn how to just sort of switch those gears without turning off the airflow, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and this progressive moving them closer together is one of the most helpful things that I have found. I do a little shortcut. Maybe you do this when writing as well. So what I'll do is, like, let's say I have a section where I know I'm going to sing a vocal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the melody starts on, like, I don't know, that's the note. What I'll do is I'll take that, and like I can already tell that that's going to be a more false chord based sound. But what I'll do is I'll take and then find a scream that works for that, right?
Totally.
And so like and then I'm like, okay, I know I want to sing this melody. So in this part, I guess that's the scream I'm going to do. And I like kind of write backwards. I find the melody, I find the scream that works, and I make sure that the section butting up to that note is going to end on that specific scream, and I stitch them together that way. Because there are some, like, I'm kind of a lazy piece of shit sometimes, and like I hear other vocalists try these things, and like I'll hear them, and I'm like, I just don't have the desire to. Like, I'm just not. Give me the easy mode. Like, I want to find the easiest way to sound cool, and if it's too hard, I'm not doing it.
Well, you know, there's something to that though too, because if you're going to play your songs live, like it's important to take that into account. I think like sometimes easy mode is like it sounds lazy when you put it in those words, but sometimes it's like smart mode or like realistic mode or performable mode, you know?
Yeah.
Rather than, I mean, it's the same thing. Like if you're writing on guitar, it's like, you know, you could say like you're using different parts of the fretboard, like moving way high, up, low, whatever. Like, you want to arrange things in a way that are more ergonomic because it's like smarter and more achievable. So sometimes if you're what feels lazy is actually, you know, or like easy mode, whatever, like you may just be setting things up to be more ergonomic for your voice in a smarter way.
And, you know, building on that, one thing that I will never agree with is that technical skill makes something good or bad. Because I have heard bands that can shred just as well as you guys, but their music is not what I would want to listen to. Because like they have a ton of technical skill. Does that make their music good? I would say no. You know, and there are some of my favorite music right now is just like one of my favorite songs of all time. It's called Every Sound Below by Tim Erickson. And he literally, the whole song is 4 notes on the guitar. It just goes, that's the whole thing. And he's just singing. He does like a little bit of vocal riffing, but he's in his chest voice pretty much the whole time. And that's all it is. And like, if we compare that to this, which song is more technically difficult? This, but both are extremely good songs. So sometimes when people are like, oh, I hate that song because there's no skill involved. In my mind, I'm like, ew, lame, L take. Like, I just, you know, for me, exactly. And it's also hard to take technique and make it sound good. And that's what you guys are really doing nonstop is like tons of like, and then crazy fucking vocals, but it's all cohesive and it all works.
I think. Well, you know, for us, like we, like I was involved with kind of the instrumentals on this album, like not like playing guitar on them, but like just sitting together and like writing in like sessions and stuff. And we start with chord progressions and like simpler versions of the riffs that become embellished later. But it's like we're thinking way more about like the flow of transitions and like the sort of core of a riff more so than the embellishments and like the flourishes on it. And that kind of gets brought in more later, but it's like from the very, very beginning, we're thinking way more about the overall flow of the song and like how the sort of harmonic content of a section makes us feel before we're like, let's do a crazy, you know, this sort of thing or whatever.
Yeah. That probably is the fact that you start with a simpler framework and then embellish later is probably why Fallujah songs, and I think this is one of the things I like about Fallujah, is they even with all of their technicality, they still sound cohesive and smooth. You know, it's like a very complex like whiskey or gin. Like, yeah, it still has bite, but like it's smooth and it's drinkable. I love gin.
Well, you know, that's part of why I've been so like I guess like upfront with like bringing more clean vocals into Fallujah is because to me like the music has like even like brutal parts sometimes like has these like chord progressions that you may not notice if you're like not listening closely, but I'm like, there are like great chord progressions here that just support melodies in a very natural way. Like if you took away the blast beats or whatever, I'm like, this is literally a very melodic song underneath a lot of the brutality.
Sure.
And to me, it just naturally fits at that. And it's like Fallujah has always had a lot of like lead guitar melodies as a huge component, you know, in the songwriting.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like the vocals I felt like could serve the same sort of purpose, like in terms of like you just melodies just work over the music as opposed to maybe bands that write more like chromatically or sort of different styles in terms of what's going on note wise and chord wise in the songs. Like Fallujah is a band that just you know, I'm not even saying it's like a good or bad thing, whatever, but it's music that supports melodies naturally.
Yeah. It maintains atmosphere and melody while being techy and brutal. I agree. Well, that's pretty much all I got, man. I've kept you for over an hour, and I got end of the month accounting to catch up on and student emails and everything.
Man,
but
yeah.
anything else you want to add before we wrap it up here? I mean, obviously, you know, you've mentioned the new album coming out and the singles, but anything else you want to add? And it doesn't have to be Fallujah. Like you've got like, are you still doing archaeologist stuff or is that? Yeah. So yeah, plug whatever you want, man.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, so first of all, you know, our main focus right now is the new Fallujah album comes out in a little over a month. It's called Xenotaph. It's coming on June 13th. So obviously, as part of my job, I am obligated. There you go. Xenotaph. Obviously got to be plugging that. That's the main thing we're focusing on right now. You can pre-order that from Nuclear Blast. Yeah, we're excited to get that out. And yeah, beyond that, I'm still doing Archaeologist as that's like my long-time personal project since way before I was in Fallujah.
Yeah.
These days, it's more of a side project just because I'm like on my own schedule for that versus having, you know, tours and responsibilities and like, you know, band things happening. Archaeologist kind of more my like do whatever I want project. But
Sure.
yeah, still doing stuff for that. And yeah, should be a cool, busy year. Lots of Fallujah plans in the works that are not really like announced yet, but we'll be touring on this album. And yeah, mostly just excited to see what people think of it. Because this album, like, you know, when I talked to you last time, we had just started promoting our new album, Empyrean, which was my first Fallujah album.
Yeah.
And that one, when I joined, like, the album was already in progress. And I joined basically to help the band, like, complete this album that was, you know, they were already working on. They had a vision for it. This album, on the other hand, I've been involved since the very beginning. So this one feels very much like now that I'm established in the band and kind of have all this experience under my belt, I'm like, okay, this is going to be my album to like actually show what I can do, you know, and write in a way that is fully based on my own, you know, preferences, whatever, like from the very beginning. So, and it's a whole concept album. There's a whole story through it. To me, this is like, even though it's my second album, I'm like, feels like my real first Fallujah album in a lot of ways.
That makes sense.
So I'm very excited for this one in particular.
Well, hell yeah. That's awesome. Well, yeah, I would encourage anybody. I mean, a lot of people watching this are going to already be aware of and know Fallujah, but anybody, you know, having done Kardavox for a while, I have people who, and we love these people, they just watch any video because they're just curious about it. So really, I think Fallujah is, y'all are a band that has a good discography start to finish. So I encourage people to check it out. And that's all I got. So hell yeah.
And listen to the new Kardashev album.
And listen to the new Kardashev album. Thank you, man. Well, with that being said, thank you all for watching. Many thanks. Much love. I'm out.
Hell yeah.